Good evening, Joshua Shapiro.
Good evening, Mr. Hacko. Nick, sorry.
Just a nick for you, Joshua. Thank you for taking time to talk to us. And before we get into details, tell me please, who is Joshua Shapiro?
Well, I own a watchmaking company out here in Los Angeles, California. I've been doing this 9 years, both as a hobby and a professional. I have my Infinity series line of watches, and I'm working on some other in-house projects. And I have some really great employees, and we're all really passionate about watchmaking and doing things that haven't been done in America in a long time.
So you've been referred to as the world-class expert on engine turning. That is very specific. Can you tell me more about what the engine turning is? And the second question is, are you really a watchmaker or dial maker or engraver, machinist? Are you just a maker or an artist? I know you are an educator as well. So I don't want to put you in a box, but tell us more about who you are and what the engine turning is all about.
Yeah, I don't know about world class. Maybe slightly less obscure engine turner. So yeah, I mean, in short, I've been engine turning very, very seriously for about 6 years now. There's just something about it that really appeals to me, and I've dedicated a lot of time and a lot of sweat and a lot of tears to always try to continually improve my engine turning and my skills around that. The truth is, when I got into watchmaking about 9 years ago, and I was looking through Watchmaking by George Daniels, I kind of had to pick a point to start at. And at the time, just reading through that book, I was so overwhelmed by the amount of tools and tooling I need to make a watch movement. I decided, why not? Why don't we start with engine turning? Engine turning, I can maybe try to master this arcane art and leverage that into making watch dials, and then maybe my own watches with engine turn dials on it. And that'll fund my ability to purchase all the other machines that I'll need to make watch movements. And so that's my plan, and I've been sticking to it. And so now I'm in a position where, I have a full machine shop. I have every tool I possibly need to make every component of a watch. I could have never gotten there if I hadn't have started with engine turning and used that to generate income and try to master that area before I moved on to all these other areas. And in the process of learning engine turning, I learned all these other machining skills, because so much goes into engine turning. Just making a dial, whether that's turning that on a lathe or different milling operations, or tapping extremely small holes, like all these different skills that I learned for dial making completely work towards making movements as well. To answer your question, am I a watchmaker? I make watch parts. I make watch parts that a lot of people that have gone to watchmaking school can't make. I've done the British Horological Institute's distance learning program, but have I sat down and done watch repair for 15 years? I haven't. That doesn't really appeal to me. That's not very interesting. And you're right. I was an educator. I was a teacher that became a principal. So I didn't have the luxury of being able to stop and go to watchmaking school. So all this was a part-time thing, the whole watchmaking thing. And when that started to get really successful, now the watchmaking is the full-time thing, and the education side of things is part-time. So that's everything in a nutshell.
I think that's plenty for one lifetime, and especially with someone who is as young as you are. You have a young family. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Yeah. I'm married, and I have a 7-year-old girl, 5-year-old boy, and a newborn 2-month-old boy. So I've got my hands full, but it's all worth it. I love them to death. And, you know, I really enjoy when they come into the shop and start playing with things and get curious. And that's a lot of fun too.
Well, engine turning is probably one of the most challenging aspects of watchmaking. And in order to be really good at it, you have to love it. But
yeah,
tell me a little bit more about your love for horology. Surely there was some influence there early in your life that got you on a path of thinking and loving the beautiful designs. Tell us more.
Yeah, so my father and my grandfather were both machinists, and on my mother's side, you know, my grandmother and my grandfather, one was a doctor and one was an artist. So all the mixing and the soup of talents and skills and stuff was all there to kind of lend to this. But when I was a little boy, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, who was a machinist, and he was kind of a jack of all trades. He was a dressmaker that became a welder, that worked on the Manhattan Bomb Project and didn't even know he was working on the Manhattan Bomb Project because they kept everything secret. Then he came to California and started a sandblasting company and a machining company. And then from there, the area he was in horrible shape, so he started a city. He became one of the first city councilmen and mayors, and just an incredible person. And so I got to grow up with him, got to spend a lot of time with him. And anything I was interested in, he already knew how to do it. He was a jack of all trades. So like when I was 6 years old, we smelted gold. Or like he'd let me polish these big jars full of turquoise. He'd let me just sit there and like polish and make jewelry and things like that. And any question I had, anything I was interested in, he had already done it, and he was happy to show me. And and then he passed away, and you know, I continued my education. I got really into history and became an educator. And then when I got married, I really got into like the kind of something about it. You reminded me of my youth. I really got into watches and metallurgy, and you know, that was kind of all from my time as a young kid, spending time with him. So I guess that was the sort of the fire that kind of led into this. Just those experiences as a really young kid, and kind of an affinity for working with metal and seeing what it can transform into. Yeah. And so here I am.
The transformation of metal, the surface of a metal, with a sharp tool comes in many forms. And
yes,
what we refer as guilloche or engine turning or rose machine turning is a very specific process of material removal. Tell
correct.
us more about the process itself and the equipment and machinery that is used to achieve the surface finishes.
Sure. Well, I don't know how well people are going to be able to see it in the video, but this is a rose engine machine over here, and this is a straight line machine over here. And one machine, the straight line machine, is for doing vertical lines. So popular patterns like the diamond pattern or the basket weave pattern are done on a straight line machine for vertical patterns. And then a rose engine machine does circular patterns, circular guilloché. So this works much more like a traditional lathe. If it's all right, I can just bring the camera over there and kind of show them both in action.
Please.
See here. So here's a rose engine machine. The workpiece would be here. And these rosettes generate the pattern. They're copied from over here over to here. And then on a straight line machine, let me get the microscope out of the way. This is for a tourbillon clock, but I don't know if you can see that, but the machine is moving up and down. And then a pattern is being traced over here. These cams, these bars over here. These are the ones you guys made for me. The Hacko team can make anything, even pattern bars for a 100-year-old straight line machine. And the rosettes over here are made out of bronze. And they're very beautiful. This is where the term rose engine machine comes from, because these rosettes, these cams over here, kind of resemble roses. I can pull. So like here's a rosette that really does look like a rose. And these are made out of bronze. Some of these are new. Some of these are hand machined recently, and others are, 100 years old.
So Joshua, tell us please a little bit about the rose engines themselves. Where is the computer interface to that rose engine?
Yeah, the computer interface is the handle on the machine that you move with your hand. There's not even a motor on them. So it's low tech to get a very, very, very precise, very, very geometric pattern that can be extremely small, extremely accurate, but it's all done by hand. It's hand operated or manually operated. There's a whole rabbit hole of controversy to go down. What's handmade versus what's manual, what's CNC, it's a whole nother thing. But in short, there's no computer on these. I control the pressure with my thumb. And in terms of turning the machine, that's done by just moving a hand wheel.
Well, I was a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, in La Chaux-de-Fonds, visiting second-hand machinery dealers there. And I walked into a showroom of a rather famous, well-known dealer. And right there was a huge, massive, beautiful, immaculate condition rose engine. And I asked, how much? And he just laughed and said, I have callers, especially from Asia, calling me every day. And they say, just name the price. We'll buy this machine off you right now. And he said, literally, I'd rather die than to sell that machine.
That's so funny.
Why is it so?
I guess, well, first off, it's much harder to find machines in Switzerland. And that's because you have some of the big brands buying them up and locking them up and letting them collect dust. So it's much more difficult. It's already extremely difficult to find rose engine machines and straight line machines as it is, but it's 10 times worse in Switzerland because you have big brands just buying them up to make sure that other people can't use them. So that's one reason why that machinery dealer has people hounding him. Second, there's a mystique about having one of these like antique machines. Yes, you can build new ones. Breguet or Montrose Breguet, Swatch Breguet, they have a bunch of brand new rose engines and straight line machines that they had made for them. But there's a certain mystique about having these antique old machines, sort of a link up to tradition. And also it's just amazing that you can produce this high quality of work with the machine that's so old. But if you take good care of it and you have good tooling for it, you can produce really great effects.
So
in the United States, go ahead.
Tell us a little bit about, from a purely historical perspective, how the rose engine pattern and guilloche pattern came about being so highly popular and desirable. Clearly, it was difficult to generate it, but there were other reasons.
Yeah, so I mean, the history of the Rose engine almost goes back to the history of the lathe. You know, a lot of watch parts, for those of you who don't know, a lot of watch parts are made on a machine called a lathe. And a lathe spins an object, and material is removed from that spinning object. And lathes have been around for a long time, but they started to really take a leap forward in the 1400s and the 1500s. And that was right alongside Rose engine machines. Rose engine machines are a lathe, essentially. And those two early technologies kind of evolved together. But the Rose engine machine, because of the rosettes component to them, are much more complicated than a traditional lathe. So you'd have in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, Rose engine machines that would cost more than an entire village would earn in 10 years. They were extremely expensive to make, and they were highly prized. They were basically producing high-end artwork for kings and queens, and there just weren't that many around. Around the 1700s, you start seeing more of the machines produced as sort of industrialization is beginning to first happen. And as a result, you start seeing engine turning and guilloché on more and more objects. People often think that A.L. Breguet was the first person to use guilloché, but there are hundreds of years before Breguet of guilloché being used. And there's even a watch in a British museum that has engine turning on it from the 1650s, about 130 years before Breguet. So this guilloché was already out there. It was already being done. It's just in the 1700s, and finally when Breguet picked it up, it was much more accessible, and you had masters of it already that could take this art form and really apply it to pocket watches, particularly. And Breguet also wasn't, you know, we spoke before that there was guilloché 130 years before him, but for the most part, guilloché was done on pocket watch cases. You'd see that a lot, and you'd see that a lot in the 1700s. You see that a lot in the mid 1750s, and in particular, you know, there's a watchmaker, Lepine, very, very, very influential watchmaker, and he had a big influence on Breguet. And I'm pretty positive.
Was Lepine the slim line guy?
Yeah. Yes, that Lepine. Yes, the one that you know, started using bridges and, you know, figured out a way to really make movements much, much thinner. So the same Lepine that was doing that, you know, had a lot of guilloché done on his pocket watch cases. And so I'm pretty sure that he's the one that sort of introduced Breguet to his artisans in the, you know, the watchmaking sector of Paris. And at that point, Breguet wasn't sitting down himself doing the guilloché. He probably didn't even have any employees yet in the 1780s, 1790s that were doing guilloché. He would just be going to the same artisans that were already making the pocket watch cases and were engraving them with guilloché. And then eventually, you know, they had the idea of putting it on watch dials in Breguet's style. And, you know, it probably wasn't until the early 1800s that Breguet brought engine turning in-house. It's a very, very fascinating history. It's a really neat history to look back and see how these art forms evolved.
Well, I think I've heard you said this before, that his guilloche dial were so popular that customers who already had a Breguet watches with enamel dial and porcelain dial,
correct,
will come back to Breguet and say, "Hey, I want your new style dial. Take this old porcelain dial, install a new dial."
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think that was actually pretty common. You can see in Breguet's order books where people have, you know, upgraded to a silver guilloché dial versus their porcelain dials. And that actually causes some like ambiguity in the historical records. Well, who was the first person to start using guilloché dials. You know, Vacheron says that, you know, they have their first guilloché watch dial was from 1782, and Breguet says, I think, like 1784 or something like that, but it's unsure if these were dials that were just done later and put on earlier watches. But that's for historical watch nerds to the 10th degree, but I find it interesting. What's really fascinating is once we get into the 1800s, then guilloché explodes, and you start seeing it on all sorts of objects. It becomes very, very, very popular. And, you know, by the time you get into the early 1900s, you know, a lot of guilloché is happening on watches, but I'd say it's the minority of all guilloché that's happening is on watches. By that point, you're seeing it on snuff boxes, you're seeing it on cigarette lighters, you're seeing it on napkin rings, you're seeing it on music boxes, Fabergé eggs, of course. Those are some of the most famous engine-turned objects in the world. I have a book that's 400 pages long, and it's just on engine-turned guilloché snuff boxes from Vienna in the 1850s. 400 pages, just snuff boxes from that period. And it's really inspiring to see how incredible these artisans were from that period, you know, pre-electricity. It's very, very inspiring. Yeah.
Tell me more about the process itself, the way you do it. In a sense, you start with a blank. Is the pattern already predefined, at least in your head, or you draw a sketch? Or how does it work, that transformation from idea to a completed dial? Do you start over again? Do you make mistakes in the process?
Yeah. Mistakes are healthy and normal and frustrating, but they're part of the learning process. And, you know, I still make plenty of mistakes, but that's the only way to get better. You know, there's a viewpoint out there that, you know, like everything that comes out of a factory is immediately perfect, but it takes a while to get there. And making mistakes and screwing up is just part of that. I've messed up. I have a big graveyard of messed up dials. But I wouldn't be where I was without all those mess ups and learning experiences. In terms of the process, so there's a few patterns that I particularly like. I like very classical engine turn patterns because I agree with George Daniels that I don't want legibility to decrease because of the flashiness of a guilloché pattern. So all the patterns that I like are pretty understated. And I'd say the flashiest of the patterns that I have is my own infinity weave, which is a basket weave within a basket weave. But it's still very legible, and it's very easy to distinguish the different sectors of the dial and be able to tell the time. So usually I stick to basket weave, infinity weave, and barleycorn pattern. And, you know, I know where I want those on a dial, and I usually have different segments of the dial that I weld together. So the infinity weave is a completely different piece. That way, if I mess up on that, I haven't messed up the entire dial. And I take that, I make a recess, and I laser weld the infinity weave portion in for the subdial. The chapter rings, I mill a recess for that, and then I use extremely small screws and screw in the chapter rings. And so as a result, you know, I can do a dial in different components. And if I mess up one part, because the failure rate is still high, I haven't lost all the work. Maybe I've just lost part of the dial, and I can replace that. And that's sort of like my business model, because if every dial, if I make one mistake on it and I've just put hundreds of hours into that, then I'm in big trouble financially. If I'm investing a lot of time into different parts, like I have about 150 hours into a single dial, but that's spread out on different parts. If I mess up one, okay, that's that can be tens of hours down the drain, but it's not hundreds of hours. Yeah.
Well, that's good news, because I always feel sorry for guilloche dial makers. It must be so crashing to stuff it up at hour 149.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the Infinity watch series. How many pieces were produced? My understanding is they're all gone, sold. And
Yeah.
who are your customers?
So the Infinity series was my fundraiser watch series. My goal was to make the hands, make the dial, make this gold plaque on the back, and make the absolute best dial that I possibly could, best hands that I possibly could, and buy in the best movement I possibly could and the best cases. That way I wasn't investing too much time in trying to make a watch movement and a case from scratch on my very first projects before I knew if it was going to be successful, putting in all this capital. And so that's what the Infinity series, that's the purpose of it was, and it sold very, very well. I've sold about 50 watches, most of them recently, most of them in May when I launched my meteorite watch, and I got a lot of buzz out of that. About half of all my watch sales came then. So I still have about 25 more watches to make and deliver by the end of the year. And, I've decided not to really make any more for this year because I can't handle more of a workload right now. I'm already prototyping in-house movements and cases, and also finishing out all these Infinity series. So I've basically closed my order books on the Infinity series for now, and we'll see if I open them back up. I've got to figure out the business side of whether I want my new in-house series to be prominent and retire the Infinity series or keep the Infinity series going. But that's the short on that. And sorry, you had a second question on the Infinity series? Sorry.
Who are your customers, Joshua?
Sorry. I mean, my customers are, I'd say, a good chunk American. And then I have customers from Canada, Switzerland, Singapore, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Australia. Yeah. So, and most of them are, big independent collectors. I very rarely get someone that's just a straight Rolex collector that decides to go off the beaten path, and I'm the first independent. Usually not, but I have had customers like that have only bought like the traditional big brands, and then I'm their first independent. But for the most part, not. For the most part, most of my customers already own a Voutilanen or already on a Roger Smith waiting list, and have been dabbling in independence for a while. And then they discover me, and they're very interested. Yeah.
Big chunk of our business is buying and selling secondhand watches. And I'm almost ashamed to admit that to you. But hey,
why? That's a great business.
That's what pays bill and, keep us busy. And I like to think of it as a guerrilla fight over, when we're fighting those big brands, we are basically capturing their watches as enemies, and we sell them for profit. So it's a Rolex and Omega and Breitling that help us grow. But what I would like to ask you, I got lost again with this. This will be, I don't know, I just got sidetracked. What I'm trying to say is this. The ultimate, so we deal with a lot with the watch enthusiasts and collectors who would probably have 20 or 30 or 40 watches in their collection. And they're all big brand watches. These guys are rarely, any of those collectors would venture into independent watchmaker. Yet I believe that the ultimate act of sophistication when it comes to watch collecting is to collect independence. Collect independent watchmakers. I can't think of anything more sophisticated than what you just said. Have a piece of Joshua Shapiro, have a piece of Roger Smith, have a piece of that guy who made the watch for you.
Right.
I just
Yeah, I
think
mean,
that
I
the
think it
transition,
really depends.
from mainstream security of that safety blanket, big name, to independent is very hard part for, and maybe 1 in 1,000, maybe 1 in 100,000 would venture down that path.
Yeah, I think, well, first off, I think it's growing all the time. I think our segment of the market is really starting to explode. And I think we have FP Journe to really thank for that. FP Journe is sort of the gateway drug for collectors going from the big brands to independents. They discover Journe, and then they kind of discover this whole other world. And I think we kind of have him to thank for that, of people journeying into the independents. I also think it kind of depends on why a person collects. If they're collecting because they're really fascinated by these mini mechanical marvels, then I think eventually they'll gravitate towards independence. If they're collecting as status symbols of their wealth, then we'll probably never see those collectors. They're going to stay in Rolex and Patek because they're buying watches to say, I'm wealthy and rich. Look what I've got on my wrist. Versus someone that really appreciates deeply both the art form that goes into it and the difficulty in machining such tiny parts. And I think there's definitely a divide between those two. And sometimes people, are a mix and match of both, or make that leap from collecting as a status symbol to really appreciating what it is. Yeah, but that's sort of my read on collectors and sort of that whole world.
I think I got a fairly good idea where you're heading right now, in sense of your future plans and growth and where you want to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. Well, you told us you kind of achieved a super high level of quality workmanship when it comes to dials. You're now ready for mechanism itself in-house, making watch parts in-house. And you said that you're fairly well equipped when it comes to machinery. You can make almost any component in your workshop, following George Daniels' tradition way. What would take you to next level? Is there something that you feel, a piece of equipment or a technique, or what would you like to get as a Christmas present from that wealthy auntie from New York? What would take you to next level?
Most of the machines in your machine shop. You've got some pretty incredible machines. I mean, the truth is, for what I'm going to do, I'm very happy with the machines I have. I have a Haas CNC machine. And so that's sort of my break with George Daniels. He was making one-off timepieces, but when you're doing production, CNC is really the way to go. It's, as you guys know, it's a tremendous amount of work to get that first prototype watch part, main plate, bridges off of the CNC machine. But in terms of repeatability and being able to do that again, the CNC machine is the way to go. And I'm very happy with mine. I have a Haas office mill, and it's extremely accurate. And it really does its job well. And I have, in terms of non-manual machines, the only other space age machine I have is my lasers. And I use those for engraving when customers don't request hand engraved numerals. They're also very handy for blanking out small parts. Other than that, all the other machines I have in here are, the same machines you'd see in George Daniels' workshop. And for what I'm doing right now, I have everything I need in order to produce the watches that I want for right now.
So it would be fair that the only thing you need more of is time itself.
Yeah, time and manpower. Like there's also sort of the myth out there that independent watchmakers are living in a cave by themselves, doing every single part of the watch. But there's very few people that actually do that, and there's a reason for that. It's not really economically viable. Like you're limited by your time and your manpower. So if it's just you, the amount you're able to make and produce is extremely limited. So I have some absolutely phenomenal people that I've hired and work with that are brilliant, extremely talented people. And many of them, I've trained them in techniques themselves, and they've brought tremendous skills, and I've learned a lot from them. And so that's the best way to enable a company to grow, to be healthy, and to really be able to produce watches in a way that you can meet demand and keep the lights on and put food on the table.
If you have a luxury of starting all over again, but by that I mean packing up, taking all your earthly possessions, all your machinery, tools, skills that you already have, your wife and your 3 kids, and start relocate to some other country, where would you go? And the reason why I'm asking is obvious, because being a top guillocheur in California is cool. But if you to start over again, do you feel that maybe some other place, some other country, what about Japan? Wouldn't you want to be the best dial maker in Japan, where there is certainly more people who would appreciate your art? No disrespect to American taste,
Mm-hmm.
but am I asking you this question the right way? Or maybe you're just happy where you are and you couldn't care less?
The second part, yes, I'm happy where I am. It's not that I couldn't care less. In Switzerland, for instance, it is so much easier to get anything you need watch related in Switzerland than any other place in the world. You guys know this being in Australia. I know this being in the United States. Either you have to make it yourself, or you have to deal with manufacturers that are not in the watchmaking field and maybe have nothing to do with watches. And so you have to teach your suppliers what you need, versus in Switzerland where it's all there. You can go to Switzerland with an idea, and as long as you have a bag of money, you can get anything made from you. You can get a complete, bespoke, whatever watch with whatever complication. As long as you've got the money and the time, you can walk away with Switzerland with anything you could possibly need. But that doesn't interest me. I'm excited, just like you guys are excited to be manufacturing, making watches in Australia. I am super excited to be manufacturing, making watches in California. The United States had such an incredible watchmaking tradition, and the watches we made here were outstanding. And Switzerland destroyed all that in the 50s and 60s. And so I am extremely proud to be making watches here, and extremely proud to be reviving this industry along with a lot of really other incredible people in the American watchmaking scene. And so I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. It's interesting that no matter what country you go to where people are becoming watchmakers and making their own watches, they're very, very proud of the fact that they're doing it there. And I think that's because it's so much work to make watches outside of Switzerland that people are just extremely proud. Like, look, I did this, or I made at least this part, or I did at least this much, or I made the whole thing without you, Switzerland. Ha ha ha. Like, it's really a source of pride. So yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
I'm going to play a game with you. So I'm going to ask you a question. Then the viewers will see my answer, what I believe is the correct answer. And then you will answer it. Okay. Well, okay. What is the most difficult component to make in a watch?
Oh, okay. Watch pinion.
Well, there you go. Well done. Now they don't know whether you told me that, so that's why I'm so smart about it. But it is, isn't it? It's incredibly difficult to make a perfectly polished and perfectly shaped watch pinion. Are you working on that yourself?
Yeah. 2 days ago, I was making some of my first watch pinions, and lining up the cutters to be able to get perfectly aligned pinion leaves. Very, very difficult. I just got a pinion polisher. Very, very rare machine. There's probably only a handful of people that even know what they are. So getting one is pretty difficult. And there's a lot of steps to it, but it feels pretty good to be making that part. And when it's all done, I can really hold it up and say, hey, is this harder than making a guilloché dial or not? Like, so far it's difficult. And easy to break, but the stakes aren't as high as an engine turn dial, just because there's so many more operations that go in the engine turn dial. In terms of skill and difficulty, they may be comparable in a lot of different ways, though. Yeah.
The other question I would like to ask you is this one, and I always ask this question. We run a small business. It's at any given time, it's only 8 or 9 of us here. And when interviewing people for either apprenticeship position or assistant position or watchmaker's position, I always ask this. What is your magic power? And what is the magic power of Joshua Shapiro?
What's my magic power? I think my magic power is that I never stop learning. I never look at the work I've done and say, this is perfect, I'm the best, I don't need to do anything else. I don't know if it's a disease, but whenever I look at a completed part, watch, whatever it is, I always think, how could I have done this better? How could I have fixed this imperfection? That maybe I'm the only one that's ever going to notice it. But it's always trying to improve, realizing that perfection is a goal that you'll never attain, but the path of trying to attain perfection is much more important, and always working on yourself, always being humble, always learning from other people. I'd say that's my superhuman power, is that I'm always trying to grow. I'm always trying to be better, and and trying to stay humble as well throughout that process. When I got into engine turning, a man named David Lindau, who's an amazing machinist, amazing clockmaker. He makes Rose engine machines, just a really neat man. And he said, from his experience, there's 2 types of work he sees in the engine turning world. He sees people that produce work and they think it's great and it's horrible. And he sees people that start out and produce horrible work and realize it's horrible. And when I started out, my work was horrible and I realized it was horrible. And that little bit of advice has always kind of guided me and, kept me always trying to improve. Nobody does something amazing on their first shot. And if you think that you have, there's something wrong there.
I'll ask you something else, and you have to promise me you're not going to laugh. Okay, so here it is. It's a little secret of mine. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm planning what I'm going to do and all this stuff. I'm thinking what's ahead of me. And then that thought crossed my mind. How would it feel to be a Konstantin Chaikin? I would like to wake up one morning with the realization that I am Konstantin Chaikin. I don't know why. I just love Guy, his work and what he's creating, what he doing in the world of horology. And he was not a trained watchmaker. He got into fairly late. So very impressive career. Do you sometimes wake up in the morning feeling, I would like to be someone else?
No. I know where my skills are and where my limitations are. And I'm just trying to be a better person myself. Konstantin Chaikin, he's one of the most creative, both creative artistically in terms of his watches and in terms of complications. And that's him. That's who he is. And, would I want to be George Daniels? And the answer is, I'd love to have his knowledge, but he has his own unique skills and abilities. He has a level of engineering creativity that I don't have. I'm more excited to see what I can do with the skills God has given me. I have my own box of skills and talents. If I'm working my hardest and being the best I can be, what can I do? I'm really curious to see what I can put out in the world, with the skills that I have, with the toolbox I have. And I certainly want to learn from Konstantin Chaikin and from Nicholas Hacko and from all these great people and all these great watchmakers. So hopefully maybe I can have some more tools in the toolbox. But thank God, I think envy can be a very dangerous thing, but ambition to want to learn is a very positive thing. Yeah.
This is a question that it's not a question. This is something that is becoming more and more obvious. Back to that New York collectors couple who collected modern artists, and they were friends with artists, and when those artists needed money to pay, rent, they will knock on their door and buy a piece of art. So they got into it early. And at one point of time, they realized that some of those artists that they've been buying art from are now selling for tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in that desperation, they said to each other, they looked to each other and said, "We arrived here too late." Have I arrived too late to buy a Joshua Shapiro watch? Or there is still a window of opportunity that I can get it?
Yeah. No, you have not arrived too late. Yeah. No. I have my next series coming along, and I plan to do this for a long time. So, yeah. And I don't charge based off of perception. I charge based off of how much time goes into the watch, how much labor goes into the watch. And I know some brands play a very, very tricky. Let's call a spade. Rolex probably produces their watches for much less than they're charging. But it would be horrible business for them to charge, like a small percentage markup from their actual cost. But most of the value in their watches is perception. And we benefit from that. But I'd say independent makers, when they charge for watches, you're getting a much closer cost to the costs that go into that watch, to reality, than you would with watches that are more based off of the perception. I mean, you see this with steel Nautiluses. Like their retail is like $40,000-$50,000 less than the going rate of them now. So that's a perception value. That has nothing to do with costs or manufacture or anything like that. And so as I continue to make watches, my costs will be based off of my actual costs, not based off of like, artificial scarcities or perception value. And maybe that's foolish. Maybe I should try to do those business tactics, to make even more money. But that really wouldn't sit well with me. That's not the kind of business I want to do.
Hey, Josh, you wouldn't believe it. Can you see this box? Just arrived, literally 10 minutes. It's from California. Do you know what's inside?
Yeah, meteorite. I'm glad it came.
Well, there you go. We will take good care of it for you.
Yeah, great. I can't wait to see some meteorite salami that you guys make.
Final question. Someone is ringing a bell. Let me just open the door, answer that, and then I'll ask you the last question. Last question is advice for someone who's watching this video, already got Daniel's book, already got his first piece of machinery, a lathe or something, small mill. What kind of advice would you give to that person?
Okay. All right. Let me think on that. Should I wait till you come back, or should I?
Yeah, just give me a sec.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's perfect. Check the label. Yep, it is. That's us. Wow. Yeah, look what we just got. Another delivery.
Oh, wow.
This one is rolls of German silver and brass for
very nice.
stamping, wheel stamping project. Wow,
oh, very great. Fun. Yeah.
If you ever need
any
sheets of that, we have plenty now. There's like 23 kilos in that box.
Yeah, thank you for the pinion steel. That's been fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So, Joshua, my last question is this. Do you have any advice for a young, enthusiastic watchmaker or person who just bought his George Daniels book and he's already on a journey to become a watchmaker, but he's just starting? Do you have a piece of advice that would benefit?
Yeah, I'd say the best advice I could give is finish something. Whatever project you start off in mind with, if I want to make a watch, but I'm going to buy most of the parts and I'm just going to make this part, but finish it. Whatever you start, try to get a finished something from it. And the reason for that is twofold. One is you won't really do your best work unless you're making something that you're very serious about, that you're actually going to use. And two, when you finish something, it gives you a little bit of confidence that like, hey, I can do this. And you don't necessarily need to show your first finished creations, because they may not be who you think you will be in a few years. And market perception, like you don't want your first watch to be ugly, in short. like you want to have a finished product that looks great, but that doesn't mean you still shouldn't finish things and complete projects and continue to grow, because a lot of people get stuck in this game. I'm going to make a complete watch. I'm going to make every part from scratch. And maybe they only get a few parts in and give up the whole project. Or other people have like a perfectionist problem where they do complete everything, but they can never get to a point where they're happy with it. So they keep restarting it and redoing it and never finish anything. So my advice is for anyone that's starting out, pick a project that you want to do, set realistic goals, and hit those goals and finish it, and then move on to something else and keep building and working your way up. That's my advice.
Well, it was a real pleasure, an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Josh, and thank you for your time. I'm sure
Thank you for your time.
We will bump into each other soon. We would love to hear from you when you are ready to showcase your new watch, if not before.
Absolutely.
So we wish you all the very best.
I'm sure we'll have many conversations before.